it seems like we're moving from a producing economy to a service economy. What's service?
Well, service, the Department of Labor has a lot of definitions of its own about what is meant by service, and it would run from a used car dealer who is providing a service to a doctor who's providing a service to a teacher to a waiter. So it's a broad category of people who presumably are not directly involved in producing goods, who aren't making cars, who aren't mining mines, who aren't growing corn. And the proportion of the people in the United States who are involved in service as a job rather than in terms of producing goods is growing and growing and growing. And a majority of all the people in the United States don't make things or produce things now. They are secondary in the sense that they're providing services. So our society, in terms of how people make their living, has been moving more and more toward people providing services rather than making things.
Why do we use the word care in social service? We say we care for people or that we provide care.
Well, we do it because we're confused. In fact, a system, a hospital, a social work agency can't produce care. Care can't be produced. Care is the feeling two people have for each other that's always voluntary. That's what makes it care. So you can't mandate care. Nobody can say, John McKnight, you've got to care for Billly Golfus. You could even pay me a lot of money and I might fake something like care, but care is something that's authentic. It's real. It comes from people freely chosen between each other. And it's the most priceless thing in the world. Care is. I care for her. I care for him. Now, another thing is a service, right? I work at a restaurant and I serve your meal, right? Now I smile and I'm nice to you and I hope for a tip. But nobody should think that just because I smile and I'm nice to everybody I serve the meal to, that I care for them. Mostly, they're nice, I'm nice, but I don't really care in the sense that we're talking about for hardly any of them because I don't know them. So what I am doing instead of caring for them is I am giving them a service or producing a service. A system can produce a service, right? A company can hire a waiter and say, serve these people who come in here. But it can't say, and we want you to care for them. Care can't be mandated. Care is given one person to another out of their heart. And the great illusion of our time is that a system, a service system, can produce care. It can't mandate care. It can't produce care. Care can't be produced. Care is something that is given between people. It's a gift. And gifts can't be produced. Gifts are given.
Right up that alley is a phrase that you've used, which is the mask of love for the providers.
Well, when I'm a waiter, if I deal with you in such a way in order to get your tip that I just exude apparent care, I'm an actor, in order to get this tip, what I'm really doing is I'm putting on a mask of love. And what I think has happened is that we have a kind of dishonesty, fostered incidentally by administrators and policymakers who talk about something called Medicare. Now you know and I know, Medicare doesn't care. Medicare is a large system that sends out checks to doctors and patients for fees for a service. But all kinds of institutions that can't guarantee human treatment steal the word, this human word of care, and attach it to their system. And in that, they put on the mask of love, because my caring grows out of, in the broadest sense, my love for you. And so if I want to merchandise care, to sell care, which you can't, then I put on this mask of love to make it look like that's what I'm giving you. There's an old song I remember from my youth called Love for Sale. It's a song about a prostitute. It wasn't love she had for sale. What she had was a service. And let us hope someplace in her life there was some love, because her service had none.
When we're talking about medical attention, you were talking about Medicare, you're talking about people that need some medical help. And isn't that the way that these service organizations work, based on needs? The whole, you talked about needs and
Yes.
and capacities oriented. Could you talk about that?
Sure. We have as much problem with understanding the difference between care and service as we do about needs and gifts. And let's see if I know everybody understands this difference, but there's an effort to confuse the two. If I had a glass like this, right, and this glass were filled to this point, you could ask, like when I was a kid, that people would say, is that glass half full or is that glass half empty? And the answer is that it is both. And since the answer is that glass half full or is it half empty, the answer is yes. It is both. But it makes all the difference in the world whether you're focusing on the full half or whether you're focusing on the empty half. Now, when you look at me as an individual, right, you must know, right, that I have my empty half. There are problems I have. Right? I have a heart problem. That's a kind of a emptiness. At the same time, there are capacities I have. Right? I can cook a wonderful meal. And so, if you want to look at me in terms of my capacities, you'll see an aspect of me and you'll respond in a certain way. And if you want to look at me in terms of my emptiness or my deficiencies, you'll see some and you'll respond in a different way. Now, almost all decision makers, whether they're in foundations or little organizations or businesses or services or government, are making a choice as to whether or not they are basically looking at people in terms of their fullness or in terms of their emptiness. But they don't see that difference. They don't think about it. And what's happened in the last 30 years in the United States is that we have focused ever more on people's emptiness and much less on their fullness.
And make needs surveys.
And needs are the name we give for your emptiness. If I can find out every problem you have and everything wrong with you and everything missing in you, then I'll call that a need. And once I have focused on your emptiness, then I can hire service providers to fill you up, to fix you up, to make you whole. If, on the other hand, I looked at your fullness, I would be doing completely different things. I would be trying to put you in settings where you could give your gift, where your contribution could be made. I would ask you, what kind of support do you need in order for that contribution to be given? I would start out assuming that if you have a problem, your problem is that people look at you as needy. Your problem is your needs defined. And everything comes at you and says about you and to you, what's important about you is who you aren't. And that disables people. When the drum fire of needs, of therapeutic needs, of psychological needs, of physical needs, of social service needs, of social work needs, of teaching needs. All those needs and all of the people who say you need us are also carrying a hidden message, which is, you're nobody, buddy. You're nobody. And that's usually the problem that people have, in fact, at the edge, is they live a life where they have been tricked in a way into believing that what is true about them mainly is what they can't do. What is true about them mainly is their problems. And so that's a needs-oriented set of policies and programs. The other side is a capacity-oriented focus that looks at my assets, my gifts, my capacities, my skills, and says, how can they be given? Where do you need to be? What support do you need to have in order to give those gifts? Would you like some examples of that? For instance, I was recently sitting in, waiting for a friend at a meeting of social workers. And these social workers were talking about, they come together because they're involved in a program to deal with young women, girls, probably under 16, who are having babies. And they call this Mothers Too Soon, this group. And so I listened to them talking to about these girls. And they were really, their description of these girls was one that really focused on their emptiness, on their problems, on their needs. And in the course of the meeting, as I was waiting for a friend of mine was there, a young girl walked in, and she obviously was pregnant, right? And she obviously was young. And so it seemed to me clear that she was one of these mothers too soon that they were talking about in terms of all of her problems. And when they adjourned, I had a chance, because we were just sitting together, and we started talking to learn about her. And what I found out about her was that her name is Jolene Taylor, and that she is absolutely sure that she is the next Aretha Franklin, that she can sing better than Aretha Franklin ever did, even though she's only 16. And she knows that because of all of the situations in her church where she's the only young person they've allowed to take a solo. Whenever at school anything happens where they want somebody to sing, they pick her. She's got good evidence of that. And do you know what? Well, and then she went on to tell me another thing. She said she loves animals. And there are some abandoned dogs, sort of wild dogs, in the neighborhood, just wander around, turn over garbage cans. And she found one that was sick. And so behind the building where she lives, there's an abandoned garage. So she fixed it up a little and took this sick dog and put it in the garage. And she nursed it back to care. And by then it was a pet. So she has it there in the garage, and she'd begun to find other dogs who seemed to be scruffy and not well. And she's bringing them into the garage, and she is bringing them back to good health. That's Jolene Taylor. And you know what she needs? She needs a record producer.
Yeah, right.
She doesn't need all the stuff they were talking about at that meeting. She needs an opportunity to go to a veterinary training school. Or maybe to visit some kennels. Maybe she needs a little capital to start a kennel. What she needs is the stuff that takes her gifts and moves them forward and lifts them up. And what she's going to get is psychological counseling,
Right.
lectures on her sexual behavior, right? And a whole series of other helpers advising her, counseling her, guiding her. Now, it seems to me that what has happened in our society is we now have lots of people who've gotten labels like pregnant teenager. Have is people who've gotten these labels, these emptiness labels tagged on them, like pregnant teenager, or developmentally disabled, or ex-convict, or physically disabled, or single mom. The list goes on of people where the words we use about them tell about their emptiness. And therefore, the programs and resources we give them are services to try to deal with their emptiness. And it seems to us that that is an absolutely unbalanced way of approaching people. And that in fact, it is probably more important always to start with somebody's gifts and capacities rather than their deficiencies and problems. The argument is, I think, however, if we can just fix you up enough, then you can use your gift and capacity. But there are some problems with that idea. One of them is, I have a very good friend in Canada whose name is Judith Snow. Now Judith is and has been in a wheelchair all her life, and I think physically she's able to move her thumb and her face, but nothing else. Now it can be said about Judith, because she said it to me, that if there's one thing that is clear about her, it is that she isn't going to be fixed up. She, therefore, is a person almost by definition where, although one can see a kind of limit that she has, the only really reasonable response to her by anybody who's in charge of money or resources or policy or program is to say, not let's spend more and more on trying to fix her up, but rather to say what she, out of her own political struggle, has achieved, and that is, you give me the money to support me in manifesting all my gifts and talents, right? And then I'll try to make some money of my own. And in that way, I'll contribute to the society. I will become productive, and you will have to give me some kind of minimum support because of the special situation I'm in. I was recently talking with Judith, and I asked her whether or not in the last year the Canadian government now provides her, in supplement to the income that she makes, enough money for her to live a decent life in community. She lives in an apartment building that is an apartment building where all the people there are not distinguished, I mean, by any kind of disability. And I asked her whether or not in the last year she had ever purchased a service that was created specially for disabled people. And she said no, she hadn't. So what we really need to see, I think, is that the burden of proof should be on people who want to provide service. Because when Judith, a woman of, of significant disability, has an adequate income, she negotiates the world with amazing success. And her pride and her capacity are full. And she is in touch with all kinds of people who can see her gifts and share them and support her in them. So that seems to me to be the basic question. The basic question isn't how many services can we give you? The basic question is how can we give you what you need to lead a decent life socially and economically? And then we'll see whether or not there's any special service that you also need. But it's the last thing, not the first thing.
Okay, I want to talk about in a minute I want to talk about the economic reasons why there are these help orders.
Yeah.
But first I want to talk about some emotional reasons why. When I'm a helper and I'm helping someone, that puts me in a particular emotional relationship to them. the helper is up and the helpee is down. And there's also,
Yeah.
you've written about helping is a non-political activity that cannot be questioned. Could you talk about those things?
Yeah. Well, you see, if helping, if I control your life, but I call it helping you or caring for you, then the fact that I control your life, which is a political fact, can be denied, can it? As long as I am wearing a mask of love, right? As long as I'm wearing a mask of help, as long as I'm wearing a mask of care, then why should anybody ever question me? If I love people, I like to help people, right? But I control your life, and you want to shout out and say, hey, I want to control my life.
But I have deficiencies.
Well, but you know what? I have deficiencies. The difference between you and me is that the world rewards you for your deficiencies and they reward me for my capacities. But you don't have any more than I have. In fact, I think you probably have less. It's a question of power. If you get defined so that in society, the main thing that people pay attention to is your deficiency, it's because you're not politically powerful. And if you ever get powerful enough that you can define the world, right, then things will shift and you won't be in need of me. I was last week in Vancouver at a meeting of an advisory council to the social service ministry, and it was an advisory council dealing with people who experience disabilities. And it's held in a junior college in one of these rooms that has a bunch of steps. It's like a theater, you know, a teaching theater, and no disabled person could get into the room the way it was organized, right? And here this ministry's meeting about disabled people was held in that room.
Right.
Now, that's a political problem, right? And so I would say that the problem of that room is that people who experience disabilities don't have enough power to have made that junior college be built so that it is good for them. So now they become dependent upon others who either represent them because they can't get in the room, right? Or they become dependent on special technologies to get them there as special people, right? But if they had the power to define the world around them, then their disability would recede, their dependency would recede, they would need helpers a lot less, right? So, in a very clear way, particularly in the disabilities field, it's a political question. It's
I want
not
you
a
to talk
service
more
question.
about. I want you to talk more about those definitions and what is defined as help,
Yes.
and who defines what is defined as help, and about how the power is in the definitions. Can you
Yes.
expand on this just a little more?
Look, whenever a person declares themselves a professional, and they are saying, if you will pay me, I will do something for you. The absolute basis for that relationship is I, the professional, am saying to you, the person who may be my client, you will be better because I know better. You will be better because I know better, right? That's what the heart surgeon is saying to me, right, about my heart. And that decision on my part to then begin to use and to deal with that heart surgeon is of necessity one which will never allow equality. It'll always be dominant, subordinate, right? And you may call that care or service or helping, but when you take the mask away, what it is one person saying, you will be better if you give your mind or your body to my control. Now, that is true in some circumstances. Right? I have had the advantage of a heart surgeon, so I know that. But it can come to the place in the lives of most of us, and many of us especially who get labeled, where that dependence is not needed. But we've got a bunch of people out there now who say, you will be better because I know better, therefore you need me. And as more and more of those people get created, they need to have more and more needs. You see, they need you. And one of the ways of understanding labeled people, people who get these deficiency labels, is that we have more and more people in our society who are labeled deficient because we have more and more professionals who need deficient people or need more deficiencies in people. They got to go one of two ways, more deficient people or more deficiencies in people. So you see this ever-growing effort to show that you and I are emptier and emptier, needier and needier, in order to have more and more opportunities for people who are professionals to enter our lives. An example that struck me several years ago is this one. I come from an Irish family, and when somebody dies in the family, right, everybody in the family comes together and they have a wake and they talk and they eat a lot of meals and they bring in the priest and they do rituals and they do chants and they go to the mass and they bury people and they continue together and they have a few drinks and there's their way, right, of dealing with this problem. They all have a problem. They all have a grief. They all have a need. And they know out of history how to deal with it. And then, about 10 years ago, I met a person who had just graduated from university with a degree as a bereavement counselor, a grief counselor. Now, there were, up to that time, 10 years ago, there were no grief counselors. Now, you have heard a lot about them since then, but there were none before that. And, in fact, I don't think 10 years ago there were a bunch of people in the United States sitting around saying, gee, I wish I had a grief counselor. Right? It wasn't something that was created by people's need, but in universities, like this one here, they think up deficiencies. They measure absences in people, and then once they find what they believe is a new absence, then they can create a profession to fill it up. So if this grief that we always dealt with by prayers and songs and family and care and grieving, if that really is a problem we can't deal with, right, then a professional can say, let me deal with it. The professional now can say to the family, to the kin, leave the dying to us. We are the people who know about dying. Don't come together as a family, right? Don't go over there to that church and sing all those silly hymns, right? Don't wail, don't moan, don't have a wake, don't drink, don't do all that stuff. Come to us one by one. You'll be better because we know better. Pay us, and we will make your grief into a commodity. We'll sell your grief. Your grief is worth something to us. Your grief together isn't worth anything. It's just the thing that holds the community together, but it doesn't have any value. But if we can come into the picture, we can make your grief worth money, not to you, but to us. And we'll help break the community down by replacing community ways with our ways and our expertise and making you dependent. You see? And that's the way it works.
You're talking about community needs and about the way the community responds. Can you talk about, in some of your talking, you've talked about association in de Tocqueville and association.
Hi.
Could you talk about association and community?
Yes, yes. Community is a pretty broad and spongy and amorphous word. You can say, my community is the world, right? Or my community is the United States, or my community is the people I work with. So community, I don't think, is very helpful in thinking about something that's very definable. Something that is, however, definable, and I think perhaps more useful, is another way of talking about groups of people. And this is a way of talking about groups of people that was first in this country, the United States, written about by a young French count named Alexis de Tocqueville. He came from France and took a tour throughout the United States in 1831 and looked at what was happening here, and then went back to France and wrote a wonderful book called Democracy in America, in which he described something he had never seen in Europe. And what it was this. He said, in Europe, if we have problems, then problems are things that are understood and dealt with by lords, counts, professors, doctors, mechanics, people who are professionals, authoritative, right? He says, but I come to the United States, and you're out on the frontier in these little towns and even in the neighborhoods. What's happening in terms of problem solving is not those experts are dealing with it. But he says little groups of people come together. He says they aren't elected. Nobody appoints them. They're common people, everyday people. And he says 6, 8, 10 of them will come together and they'll discuss. They think they know what a problem is. They'll discuss how it ought to be solved, and they'll go out and solve it. And he said that is the great power of the United States over Europe, is these groups, small groups of face-to-face people acting as common people to solve problems. He named those people, those little groups, associations. He said those are associations, and an association, by his definition at least, is a group of people acting as citizens. That is, they are making a solution. They are creating a celebration. They are not consumers. You can't be an association of consumers by his definition, or of clients, because those are people who are dependent on others. An association is people who come together out of their common intelligence, and are not dependent, they are interdependent. They are creating a new world, a new way. They are solving problems. Now, that kind of an association, and many of them make up what we would define as the community. The community is the space where families, kin, neighbors, neighborhood, and the associations of citizens interact to support each other, to discover the gifts, to magnify the capacities, right, and to solve problems.
You had used the word to describe the client coming from the Greek, right?
Yes, right, all right. Associations are made up of citizens. Citizen is the word for the most powerful person in a democracy. It's a political word about maximum power of a person, right, in a democracy. Right? Dictator is the word for maximum power in a not democracy, but it's a political, powerful word. Client is a word that comes from the Greek, and it means, in its Greek sense, one who is controlled. So the client is the exact opposite of a citizen. A citizen is one who is powerful and controlling. A client is one who is controlled. And in this case, we mean controlled by an expert or a professional. A society made up of people who are almost all clients is a society which is destined to collapse as a democracy. Okay.
I want to know about people, why we have trouble providing help because the population is concerned about welfare fraud and that kind of thing.
Yes. Well, what I think happens is this. When you get a person who is defined as mainly deficient and you surround that person with a world of servers and helpers and experts, right? What has happened is that you have created a new environment for that person. And that person will know more about the